You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and thanks for coming back to the show. For our regulars, welcome back. And for anybody who happens to have stumbled here by accident, you have found Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I am Mighty Blue, the bloke having that midlife crisis. In fact, I've had it twice now, having through-hiked the AT in both 2014 and 2019. Every week on the show, we have somebody who has walked or is about to walk the AT or another long trail. To be honest, I'm not too rigid about who I speak with. They just need to have something to say about backpacking, and they're prepared to have a chat with me about hiking in general and the Appalachian Trail in particular. Today's guest is Steve Ortiz, otherwise known as Survivor. And that, as you're going to learn, is a bit of a theme running through today's podcast. Steve's a LASHer, or a long-arm section hiker. He wrote to me and wanted to share his story, and I was happy to hear from him. Steve will be along in a moment. Our middle section of the show is going to be a bit of a surprise until we get to it. It's something I've been worrying about for over a month, and, well, you'll hear after Steve. Finally, today we hear again from Grandma Gatewood's walk. This week, a massive storm is barreling up the east coast of the United States and heading straight for New England. Guess where Grandma Gatewood is? Yep, she's in New England. So now, let's get on and meet Steve Ortiz, or Survivor. Well, this week on the show, we've got a LASHer, or a long-ass section hiker. Now, I know that the section hikers normally go on the Jester Section Hiker show, but this week I thought I'm going to take my turn. This is Steve Ortiz, or Survivor. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Good, Steve. How you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. And you wrote to me, and we've had a conversation about this. And your story struck me as one I thought was worth telling to people. And I know that you retired in September 2015.
Yes, I did.
And I guess you were looking forward to a long, happy, healthy retirement, and it may very well still work out that way.
Yeah.
But what happened a month after you retired?
Well, it's interesting, yeah, because as you said, I retired in September of 15, and unfortunately, in October of 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. And at the same time, they found a growth on my kidney that they also suspected was cancer. So as you said, I thought I was just going to ease into retirement, and all of a sudden this whole thing was thrown at me. So it was quite a wake-up call.
I'm sure. How did you take that? I mean, had you been ill, or was this just a routine check?
Yeah, it was just a routine check, actually. They found it by accident. I went in for something else, and they did some scans, and then they found some stuff, if you will. They found the growth on the kidney first, and then they went in and did some biopsies and stuff, and then found the lymphoma. So yeah, it was almost by accident they found it. Fortunately, they found it just because I was not feeling bad at all. I was feeling fine.
Wow, amazing! That really is. So, and I'm right in saying I believe that you weren't really a backpacker at that time, were you?
No, I was not. No. I was very active, but I was not a backpacker at that time.
But when we spoke before, and this is kind of a bit of a side detail, which really made me laugh, you were quite an adventurous young lad, weren't you? Tell us about the young Steve.
Well, yeah, I was. That's my personality, and through all my life. And I was telling you the one story. There's a couple of stories, but the couple that I did tell you when I was about 12 or 13, a buddy of mine just had the idea. Let's see. We went to this train depot in the town where we lived at, and we're thinking, let's try and hop one of those trains. So we said, okay. So it was a cargo train. It wasn't a passenger train. So we found an open trailer and jumped in. And once we got in, the first time we did this, we're thinking, okay, this is great. Now what do we do? It all worked out. We went to another town, maybe 50 miles down the road, and it stopped. Then we hopped one back. And so we did that for a few times when we were young. And it's just one of those, adventurous type of things.
Well, it's funny, it makes you. I think we all, as kids, certainly of our generation, because we're similar age, aren't we? I'm 67,
yes.
You're 66, I believe.
Yes.
We used to do what our parents would have thought were terrible things to do at the time, and yet kids don't seem to do that sort of stuff nowadays. And of course, this lack of thought of consequences was a thing that we always used to do that. I remember once my friend we were playing Cowboys Indians, I think we used to call them over there, and he tried to hang me. Which was impressive. And I was 5 years old. I was standing on this nodule thing on a tree with a noose round my neck and over a branch. And the local people suddenly saw this and screamed at him and screamed at me not to jump. God, when you think about stuff like that. So, well, you still appear to have made it to full adulthood without completely killing yourself. So, you got this devastating diagnosis, and I'm sure it was absolutely awful. How did you react to it? What was your first thought?
Well, like a lot of people, initially I was obviously stunned. I probably went through the series of things that people go through, a little bit of denial and acceptance, and I'm not sure I was anger, but and then at the end of the day, it was like, okay, Steve, this is what it is, and. I've never tried to let any adversities define me. And so once I got through the stunning part of it, I'm thinking, okay, Steve, you're going to, whatever happens, but you can't not live your life. Yeah, and so I, wanted to continue with that and did. I went through the therapy. I went to my chemo for quite a long time, about 2.5 years.
Wow, is that a long time for chemo? It sounds
I was in the most intense part of it was the first 6 months, and that was a bit tough. And then I went for the following 2 years after that, what they call a maintenance phase. It was only one day every 2 months that I got chemo. I still had chemo, but I would go through it. Fortunately, it didn't impact me like the first 6 months of chemo from a health standpoint. But it was a long journey from that standpoint. But about midway through, I think I told you this, midway through my treatment in the maintenance phase, I got interested in backpacking. So that's when I picked up the sport of backpacking then.
I don't know what it is. Is it something about the finite length of your life, like of all our lives? We come to that realization at some stage. Why did you turn to backpacking?
Well, I think I'm not sure if it was the finite nature of life, but I think really it has to do with my personality and being adventurous. And I think I mentioned to you that I was talking to one of my son-in-laws, and he actually mentioned to me that he wanted to do a thru hike on the AT.
Right.
And I had heard of the AT, but that was about all I knew. And so when he mentioned that to me, again, being adventurous as I am, I researched it a little bit and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. And so that's when I started getting interested in backpacking and starting to do a lot of 3 and 4 day trips,
And as I understand it, you went on a test hike. You went from Springer to Woody Gap.
Yes.
Is that what lit your desire to really do the whole thing in sections, or what did it feel like to be out on there?
It was really interesting and amazing, and I think that really validated my wanting to do it more than just a 3-day, 4-day hike. And so it was just, we met a lot of interesting people just in that 3 or 4 days, and I'm thinking this is really, really cool.
What was it about the trail? Was it hiking itself or was it the trail itself? And the reason I say this is because I know that you can read as much as you like about the trail, but until you set foot on it, you have no idea what it's like until you set foot in it. So was there something that happened to you and you saw people, you thought, well, this is something that suits my personality or what?
Yeah, I think it was a combination. Certainly the nature, of course, was just beautiful, but meeting the people out there and hearing their stories and why they were out there. Everybody had a certain reason for being out there, and I just thought that was fascinating. And that really, continued to validate that I want to continue this journey on the Appalachian Trail and can see the nature and the challenge itself. Yeah, walking, it better than me. It's tough at times, and the weather.
It's only tough for about 2,000 of the 2,200 miles. The rest of it's quite easy.
Yeah, but I really was looking forward to that in a way that I'm 65 years old. and I'm gonna do this in all that adversity.
And your plan was to finish it in by the time you were 71, I believe, about 5 or 6 years?
Yeah. The plan is to still try and finish the whole thing in sections, and by the time I'm 71.
Right. So your wife has seen you through these chemo sessions, no doubt.
Yes.
Was she on board with you going on these long section hikes?
Yeah, she was. She really was. She's always supported me on my adventurous things, and she doesn't quite understand them, but she always has. The only stipulation on these longer hikes, like the Appalachian Trail, when we're gone for 3 or 4 weeks, is that to hike with somebody. That was, but the only condition that she said, she thinks I'm crazy for doing it, but she's okay with it as long as I do it with someone.
So, and I can understand that, to be fair, I can understand. But do you enjoy hiking with somebody, or do you like the idea of spending time on your own on the trail?
Well, I actually do like the solitude. I'm not as fast a hiker as my brother who goes with me, MacGyver. So I'm usually hiking by myself. I do enjoy that solitude. Now, when we get to camp and there's other people around, I enjoy that too. So I get a little bit of both worlds.
I think most of us feel that as well. It's surprising actually, with so many people on the trail, obviously not now, sadly, but with so many people on the trail, normally, people think, well, you're never going to get any solitude. I hiked for hours by myself and loved every moment of hiking by myself. But you're right. Once you come into camp and you see people there you've seen 3 or 4 days before or just the night before, there's something special about that camaraderie that builds up, isn't there?
It really is, Steve. It's a bonding thing that continues to be there. Like you said, you may not see people for 2 or 3 or 4 days or weeks, and in your case, maybe even more than that. But when you do see them, that bond is still there. You have that commonality, and I really, really enjoyed that. And the stories that I heard from various people and the reasons why they're out there and how long they're out there, because we ran into all kinds of day hikers, section hikers, and through hikers, particularly last year.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. So when was your first big section? Was that 2000 and I'm trying to think when it was 18?
Yes, it was 2018.
So that was your first big section. So what was that? How long was that?
We went about 220 miles that trip. And
did you go back to Spring at the start, or did you start from Woody Gap?
We started at Woody, and went to Pigeon River mile.
So you finished the Smokies then?
Oh yes.
I don't know about you, but I found the Smokies so difficult. I really did. How did you find those at the end of your hike?
First of all, it was beautiful, as you know. What I didn't like about the Smokies is the requirement to stay in a shelter. I'm not big on staying in shelters, although we did out of necessity because of weather. And I prefer to stay in my tent. But it was difficult. It was. We ran into some pretty nasty weather there when we were there too.
Do you know, that seems to be everybody's experience of the Smokies. People rarely go through it in decent weather. I'd love to go through the Smokies in decent weather one day, I must say.
Oh, yeah. But it was interesting because when we started the Smokies, as you know, it's right near Fontana Dam. So the walk through there to get to the Smokies with the water and the dam was just beautiful. I think it was lulling us into the, just complacency before we got to the Smokies.
It's kind of daunting, though, don't you find? As you're walking across there, it's looming at you, and then it looms closer and closer and closer. And also, I was surprised, actually, I don't know whether you remember this, when you turn from over the bridge, you turn up towards the entrance to the Smokies as well, past the sign. It's quite a walk still before you actually turn into the forest, isn't it?
It is. That surprised us. We were thinking, MacGyver and I were thinking, where's this going to start? Where is this start of the Smokies?
So how did you cope? And what was it, did you feel that you got into it pretty quickly, that hike?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we certainly had to get our hiking legs and such, but we probably still didn't know what we didn't know, even though we did that small section. Being out there for weeks is a lot different. And so we were, still working our way through what to do, what not to do, and dealing with the weather and stuff. But once we got our trail legs, it was just a matter of, getting into the element, getting into the moment. And it's just one day at a time and experiencing everything. Because as you know better than I, everything can change in a second, in a minute, in a day.
Did you fall many times? For me, my hike has always been defined by the number of times I've fallen.
I noticed that on your podcast.
I'd fall really regularly. Did you fall much or not?
Yeah, a fair amount. Mostly just to get dirty and muddy and whatever, but fortunately didn't have any injuries, other than blisters and a few cuts here and there, but it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, you know what? That's a thing to keep your fingers crossed with all the time, or touch wood somewhere, because we're all, I think all of us, when we're hiking out there, we're 1 second away from disaster, aren't we?
Oh yes, oh yeah.
It's that sudden change, and that's a long enough hike. So you say 250 miles. It's a long enough hike to get into the rhythm of a long distance hike. Were you disappointed when it was over, or what did it feel like to you? Because I can't imagine going that far and having to stop, to be honest with you.
It's interesting, Steve, because, obviously after the first day, you kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, now I get to rest a little bit. But it always came back both times, was that I missed it. I wanted to and I was envious of the thru hikers, because they got to continue to go and for weeks, more weeks. And I was leaving the trails almost like I was leaving, some of my trail friends out there. And I wanted to be back out there. And so each time, the last two LASHers, I felt the same way and still do. And now this year, if we don't go, I've got that hollow feeling, well, I can't get back out there.
So you went last year, saying you took it past 500 miles. So I presume you've reached just past Grayson Islands, I guess?
Yeah, just past. Yeah, we're at mile 520 near Dickey Gap is what we extracted out.
And did that hike, the second one, did it feel different to the first, or were you, in other words, did you kind of feel at home straight away, or because you probably worked out all the kinks in your equipment before, hadn't you?
Yes. I actually felt more at home just because I was a little more experienced. But the first LASH, it was more of a mental thing than the physical after a while. The second hike, I didn't have to deal with the mental side because I knew what I would, what to expect. I was out there. I was going to be out there for 3 weeks, and whatever came up, came up. And so I felt better about it on the second LASH.
So do you set, and this is interesting for me because I don't know this as a concept. So do you set yourself a time limit or a mileage limit?
We normally set a day limit. We're going to be out there for 21 days. And yeah, we kind of try and see if we can get to a certain mileage, but we didn't want that to be the driving point. We wanted to say, okay, we're going to hike for 22 and 23 days or whatever, and whatever miles we get, we get. We actually hiked more miles this past time than we expected because we upped our mileage per day towards the end.
Right, but once you get your legs, you can hike as far as you like, can't you? Really surprising, isn't it? Even I could.
Oh yeah, I mean, some days you didn't want to hike that far, but you had to because of the weather, whatever. And I'm a big planner, probably more than I should be, particularly with this. I had spreadsheets about we're going to stop here, we're going to do this miles. After the first couple of days, you kind of throw it out and just kind of go with what.
I think it's about the first couple of hours, personally. I did a spreadsheet, of course, like everybody else does, but I was just absolutely hopeless with it. And did you change your gear from one hike to the next, or did you? Because when you first went on this, you had no idea what gear to get either, did you?
That's
so
true.
You must have been reading a lot about stuff. So how did you work out the gear first time, and did you tweak it much second time?
We tweaked it a bit as far as carrying, stuff that you really didn't need, and probably the first time I carried too much food and probably too much water. I still kept. I had a pretty good tent. It was only weighed about 2 pounds, so I kept that and downgraded my sleeping bag a little bit. Now we didn't have to worry about cold weather because we went in the summertime, and so. We didn't have to, as far as the clothes go, we didn't have to about the same, but we tweaked it a bit and, got away. My brother and I, we kind of started to share certain things too, rather than both of us taking the same thing.
All right. Yeah,
so that helped a lot. I dropped probably about 5 pounds from the first hike to the second hike, all fully loaded, 4 days worth of food and water for the day.
Isn't that interesting? And I did the same from my first hike to my second hike, 2014 to 2019, not only because of the weight of the gear, but you realize how little stuff you actually need, don't you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because I think you get not so much entertainment, but you get your enjoyment from just being out there.
Yes.
You don't need things to distract you because everything around you distracts you, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Very much so. Absolutely.
So you've had some obviously debilitating treatment over the years. And I wonder what the hikes do for you physically and mentally. Do you have, I've never had cancer, thank God. So other than just skin cancer. But do you find it has impacted you physically in a good way?
Yeah, I think so, Steve. I think that has helped me continue to stay in shape, of course, but I think that helps me with my diagnosis rather than just sitting around. And it really does. And mentally, it absolutely does. As I said before, I won't let it define me.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing this is part of how I'm defined, an adventurous person, and and doing a lot of backpacking.
The boxcar jumper, yeah.
Yeah, the boxcar jumper, yeah.
Yeah, it's still around. And this year, and as we've said, sadly, you're not doing it this year because you were hoping to take it past 1,000 miles. So what was the plan? How long were you going to be out there this time?
We were going to be out there at least 4 weeks. We talked about 28 days, and but MacGyver and I had a couple other discussions as far as, well, maybe we should, try and go to the halfway point. But right now, if we was to go, it was going to be 28 days. Both of us are retired, so we got a little bit of flexibility there once we get out there.
So you could still be going this year, couldn't you?
Yes, but I certainly will abide by what the ATC is saying, and I want to respect that and respect everybody else's, health too out there.
Now, we had this discussion when we did talk about this. So I told you I was going to raise it again. You're retired.
Yes.
You've had some health issues.
Yes.
Why not go for a through hike? I know your wife doesn't want you to do it, but if there's one thing that my hikes have taught me is that you need to take your opportunities when they're there. Yes. She knows you're safe out there.
Yes.
You must, to be honest with you, you probably bore us silly with all the stories you tell. But,
yes.
Of course, yeah, because we can't stop talking about it. I understand that. But do you think you're obviously experienced enough now to do it, or are you happy just to continue being a section hiker? And trust me, I would never have started a section hiker show if I didn't think the section hikers are the true brave people out here, by the way, because I could never just start and stop again all the time.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of respect for section hikers, but you want to do this. You want to get this done. Are you in a hurry to get it done, or have you resolved that your wife's wishes, you're going to abide by that as well?
No, I'm going to get it done, and I'm not necessarily. I'm in a hurry from the standpoint I want to get it done before I get too old, of course.
Yeah.
But I do want to get it done, and when you mentioned something about why don't you just go ahead and finish it, that really stuck with me, and I've been thinking about that ever since. Because
I thought you were at the time, actually.
Like I said before, some people plant seeds in my mind, like hopping trains or hitchhiking around the United States. I'm thinking, yeah, why not? I'll try that.
Go for an open end, just go for an open end hike and see where it takes you. At the end of the day, as you know darn well, you can and you will meet people all the time on the trail. Yeah. So none of that will be a problem.
Yeah.
You can be as lone or as with many people as you like. It's so easy to do that, isn't it?
Very true. And I know I can do it, Steve, as you mentioned, because I feel I can do it. I've got, I've got enough experience. I understand what it would take. And so I really do have confidence that I could do it. And one of the things I was going to mention, I didn't mention it before, is that MacGyver and I both are flying into where the trailhead's going to be. It's a one-way ticket. We were going to buy our return ticket until we got to where we were going to be. And after our first discussion, I'm thinking, yeah, it is only a one-way ticket. Maybe we'll just wait.
Well, funny enough, when I had to leave the trail back in 2014, I got bitten by a dog. My wife at the time and I had a conversation about whether I should get a one-way ticket home or a return ticket home. I said, if I don't get a return, I won't come back here. So she lost that argument, and there's a mindset that you have to have, I think, anyway. So from what you understand, so you went actually the second one in the summer. So there couldn't have been that many through hikers around when you went the second time, were there?
We had the trail end of them, Steve. We actually left on May 30th.
Right.
And so we did run into a few through hikers then, and quite a few section hikers. So it was kind of interesting to meet some of those people from all walks of life and reasons. Yeah.
So from what you understand, the people you've met, do you think your experiences as a section hiker are much different to a through hiker, or they're pretty much the same thing, aren't they? I would think they're pretty much the same thing.
They really are. In fact, sometimes when you're out there and you're just doing, just going along, you forget sometimes that you're a section hiker. You're just out there hiking the Appalachian Trail and how far it takes you. And when you run into people that are through hiking, basically you're doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, tell us about some of the people you've met then. Tell us about one or two of the things that have happened to you out there.
Well, it's interesting when in 2018, our first big one, we weren't on the trail a day. I think it was our first day. We ran into this young lady, and she was hiking with an older gentleman. Her name was Fern. She was about 22, 23 years old, and we seen her and said hi. And her guy she was hiking with, his name's Squeak. And so we'd see him off and on for a day or so after that. And all of a sudden, she just started hiking with us. The older gentleman, he left on, and she stayed with us the rest of our way, almost 3 weeks with us, and she hiked with us. And she was just, she started at Springer and was going to go for 500 miles, and she was going solo, and all of a sudden she felt comfortable hiking with us. And I think part of it had to do with, we were like the fatherly figures. So she hung with us. She was an interesting young lady. And the guy that she was hiking with, he was a retired colonel. And he just decided he wanted to go out and hike the Appalachian Trail too. So cool. It was really interesting. We met a lot of interesting people.
Yeah, and everyone has their own story for their own reason for doing it now. So looking forward a few years, you've done 500 miles in 2020, let's say. You do 500 miles in 2021, and then you've got 750 to go. That must be a one shot. I think once you get, and one of the reasons I say that, I'm not trying to get you to do anything you don't want to do, obviously, but trust me, if you decided to leave the last 400 or 500 miles to New Hampshire and Maine, man, that is a tough one. That is one tough finish. So you need to have been on the trail several hundred miles before you hit New Hampshire and Maine, because that is tough as heck.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you got a good strategy for me there, Steve.
Yeah, I think you should think about it. And then think about that. The moment you're going to go up Katahdin and finish it, it's just going to be an awesome thing to do. And I'm not putting anybody off the idea of section hiking, but it strikes me you're a man who's designed to do this. So why not just get it done and just enjoy the whole thing, and then come back on the show and tell us all about it?
I'd love to.
Okay, man. Well, look, thanks for telling us about your journey. I hope you do get out on the trail this year. I'm pretty confident, by the way, that there will be some easing of the rules, I suspect, in about the next 2 or 3 months. Yeah. So with you doing sections, you could certainly do 500 miles, later in the year, and that'd be kind of nice as well, wouldn't it?
I think so. I think there is a good chance based on some of the easing up of the restrictions. So we're looking forward to it and hoping that we'll be able to get out there, as well as everybody else that wants to do the Appalachian Trail or any trails. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, man. Well, look, stay safe. And if you do go out, let me know, and we'll tell people what's happening, okay?
I will. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you, Steve. Cheers.
Bye. He's still got that adventurous streak in him, hasn't he? And I love that he's not allowed his diagnosis to define him. He's still that kid jumping onto a boxcar. What a great image that is. I hope he gets to complete his AC hike in the next few years. I tell you what, though, if I was, 13 or 1,400 miles into the hike, I'm pretty sure I want to go all the way to the end. Wouldn't you? I would not like to start in New Hampshire. I just want to thank all of you who continue to support the show financially. This is not an easy time for anybody, so I'm constantly delighted and gratified when I get a notification of a $25 donation, and more and less. Remember, you can go to mightyblueontheat.com website and click on the podcast page. If you're on your phone, scroll past this month's episodes and the donate button will be just after them. If you're on your laptop or a desktop, it'll be on the left-hand side at the top. Thank you so much. So, I want to tell you a little story. It's something that I've been fretting about for some weeks now, and this is only now that I can share it with any of you. Almost exactly 1 month ago, actually it was on March the 27th, I got a text from a buddy of mine called Graham. We used to work together in London, and he said, "Hi Steve, I don't know if you've heard from Zip, but he just told me Pete Townsend is in an induced coma with coronavirus." By the way, Zip is a friend whose real name is Lee, but as the Brits do, we tend to have other names for everybody. And Pete Townsend isn't, of course, the guitarist for The Who. He's another really dear friend of mine. That was still the early days in the public consciousness of this virus, and I was shocked. Somebody I knew really well, somebody I'd travelled the world with in business, he was seemingly at death's door. I reached out to Zip, who filled me in on the details. Subsequently, I was able to contact Rose, Pete's girlfriend, and she brought me up to date. And it was really serious. Well, over the next few weeks, I was able to get updates, and Pete seemed to be slowly improving. And it made me very anxious each time I texted Rose for an update. So you can only imagine how delighted I was when Pete came out of his coma and eventually went home. I was so relieved and was even able to speak with him. I could hear how he was still struggling to breathe. Pete's in his early 60s, by the way. Then, a couple of days later, he was admitted back to hospital. He'd already told me how awful the disease made him feel, and I really feared the worst. Well, now, just a month after all this started, here's Pete. Hi, mate. How you feeling?
Hi, Steve. Well, lovely to be able to sit here and talk to you. I mean, it was something that was probably it was something that was in the balance for a little while. Recovering now and coming to terms with how debilitating this coronavirus can be to some people. Yeah.
Well, look, you've given all your friends, and I know you know this, I've already spoken to you about this anyway, lots of sleepless nights. I know it's not your fault. Why don't we go back to the beginning and tell us what happened? When did you notice this and how were you feeling?
Yeah, I came up to work on about the 16th of March, I think it was. And I noticed that I was getting a little bit hot and sweaty, starting to cough a bit.
You're always hot and sweaty.
And I couldn't concentrate that well. So I decided to go home and I thought, maybe I've got it. Right. And so I did what the government tells us to do, which is self-isolate. Right. So I went home, sort of shut the door and sort of locked myself in. But I slept for 21 out of 20 the next 24 hours.
Wow.
And Rose, my partner, said, I don't like the look of this. And I said, no, I'm fine. She said, I'm going to call an ambulance. I said, no, don't. I said, ambulances really at the moment are a priority for people that are really ill. So don't call one.
That sounds so like you, Pete, by the way.
So don't call one for me. And then I went back to sleep. And whilst I was asleep, Rose called the paramedics, and suddenly I woke up to be with two men in hazmats in the middle of the room.
Oh my gosh!
Sort of check me out, and they told me that my oxygen levels were low.
How low was low? Because we're always told to check these. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, routinely your oxygen level should be 95% or above, and right. I was in the mid 70s. So.
Wow.
So pretty low, and they said we want to take you to hospital. So I thought, it's ridiculous. I feel fine. So I didn't even pack a bag of anything, and I went straight out and got in the ambulance and headed off towards Whipps Cross Hospital. As we're heading towards Whipps Cross Hospital, I could hear blues and twos going.
No, that blues and twos won't mean anything over here.
I'm sorry. Well, the siren, the ambulance siren's going, and I thought, bloody hell, there's an ambulance behind me that's in rushing to get to the hospital. Why don't we pull in and let them pass? It was the ambulance that I was in. It was, and then
by the way, Pete, weren't the hazmat suits a bit of a clue?
Yes.
I'm kind of wondering about that.
Yeah.
So how did they treat? How did they treat you in the ambulance though? I mean, were they
put me on oxygen in the ambulance? But I felt fine.
Okay.
And then we got to Whipps Cross Hospital, and where I was triaged, and I came straight out of the ambulance, and then straight through into the acute assessment area. And I'm thinking, this isn't going as well as I would have hoped, actually, to be honest. And then I went from there, and I was put into the high dependency unit, and a consultant came out and said, we want to put you into an induced coma and maybe put you onto a ventilator to take some of the pressure off your organs.
This was how long after you got to hospital then?
Within 6 hours.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, it really, you kind of, I went off the edge of a cliff, really. I was feeling fine, and suddenly I was feeling really ill. Yeah. So they said, we want to put you into an induced coma. So I said, yeah, fine, whatever you think you've got to do. But whilst they were talking to me about that, they then rang Rose, my partner, and said, you better prepare yourself for him not coming home.
Wow. They didn't just mean for the night, did they?
They didn't just mean for the night, no. And I've seen some of the statistics subsequently, and the chances of coming out of ventilator is about 60%, and the chances of coming out of an induced coma is about the same as well. So, and I didn't realise I was going in for that. I didn't say goodbye to Rose. I didn't say goodbye to my 3 daughters as well. One of whom was living in Chicago at the time. Yeah. And so the first they knew was Rose, my partner, telling them that Dad might not be coming home.
Oh my gosh! So, what did you know at this stage? What were they keeping you informed, or no? You're in a coma, so you knew nothing, obviously.
They just told me they were going to put me into a coma.
Right. Did you wait? My brother was put into a coma a couple of years ago. When he had what's it called? Not cellulitis. Similar thing to cellulitis, what I had. Right. But he had dreams and nightmares. Did you get any of that, or were you just?
No, I was in the coma for 6 days. Right. On the ventilator for 6 days. But right. Yeah, so in the induced coma for 6 days as well. Basically, I've got some sort of flashbacks and recollections, but I basically lost 6 days of my life. I had no real concept of it. I'd wake up and it was almost a surreal kind of out of body experience where you could sort of see yourself. Sure. I could reach out for things, but I couldn't touch them. Hand-eye coordination going. I couldn't talk. Right. I got these tubes down my throat. It was really rather unpleasant, I've got to say. And
they chose to bring you out of the coma, I presume.
Yeah, but the first night I was there, that's when they told Rose that to sort of prepare for me not coming back. And as you could imagine, my daughters are 32, 27 and 24. That was pretty horrendous for those, pretty traumatic for them. And then, but then I got through the first night, and then the consultant called them again and said that I wasn't responding to treatment, right. And the virus was now attacking my heart. And I mean, I've read the notes that Rose took from when she spoke to the consultant, and my conclusion was I'd had it.
If you'd been reading at the time, you would have thought you were history at the time. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So it started attacking your heart. Is there any explanation for that, or is it because your heart's weak already? Do you know?
No, my heart's fine. It's strong.
I thought it was. I mean, you're a long distance cycler, haven't you? I mean, you've cycled a long way, as we know, as I know anyway. So you came round.
I don't know. I don't know how far into this. It might only have been sort of part way. But the consultant came round and he said, "You may not feel it." He said, "But your numbers are heading in the right direction." And he said, "I think you're going to make it." And he went, "You must be one strong fella," he said, "because when you came in, I thought you weren't going to make it through the night."
Wow.
Pretty sobering, isn't it?
You think? You think? Yeah. I think it probably is pretty sobering. So that was, so you're in the coma for 6 days. So you started recovering, and then how long was it after that they let you go home?
They let me go home after 8 days. 9 days. 9 days.
Right. What, 9 days? 9 days after you went in, or 9 days after you're out of the coma?
3 days after I was out of the coma.
Wow, pretty good.
Yeah. But I came home, but I was really ill again, and I then had to go back into hospital, and I had something called Klebsiella, and Klebsiella is a bacteria which is naturally occurring in your intestines, and it's all well and good in there and fine. Yeah. take it out of your intestine, it becomes a sort of superbug. And I think that when they took the tubes out from the ventilator, some of the bacteria came out as well. So I then had the bacterial infection. I was then put on intravenous antibiotics back in hospital for another week or so. I mean, ultimately, I was in hospital for 23 days through all of this.
So, and I'm seeing you today now for the first time since we have spoken a few times, obviously, but I'm seeing you for the first time. You look great. You look great. You never look great, but you look. I mean, you look surprisingly well. How are you feeling yourself?
Very weak, actually. This virus has been incredibly debilitating. I've lost 35 pounds.
Well, to be fair, you and I could do with that. I don't want the coronavirus to do it, but yeah.
I need to go back about 3 or 4 more times to get down a proper weight. I'm feeling okay. But if I start to do any form of exertion, and then I sometimes start to cough, and I think that obviously that's where the virus has attacked my lungs. So it's difficult to draw deep breaths, really. But I can, but I am now very, very weak.
So, is there a prognosis? Do they want to see you again? Or they keep checking on you? What's going to happen now?
No. That's it now, as far as they're concerned. I mean, they're on to everybody else. I'm now coronavirus negative.
Right. Good to know. Good to know.
So
I know you had a really emotional text from your daughter, which you copied me in on that, which must have been so emotional for her. She thought she'd lost you as well, and never had to say goodbye. Oh, yeah, right. Read it then.
Yeah, this is from my youngest daughter, who's 24. She texted me a few days ago. She went, "Can't express how happy I am to see you. Twice while you were in the coma, I thought I was never going to see you again, and it was the worst days of my life. I love you very much and can't put into words how happy I am. I love you."
That made me cry as well when I got that. I was a bit of an old wuss, the two of us together, actually. Yeah. My eyes are getting a bit damp now as well. Like I can see you are as well. This is horrendous, Pete. Absolutely horrendous. And I think if there was one message you might like to leave us with on this virus, what would it be?
It's brutal. But it's also indiscriminate as well. I mean, you may get a very light dose. You may not even realise you've had it. You may get one, which, in my case, almost killed me. Yeah. And so my advice to you is just be careful and take all the precautions. They're telling you of self-isolating at the moment. Please don't take the bleach or the swallow UV light.
Don't do that, please. No. We're trying to keep out of politics.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah, don't do that. No, don't do that then. Oh, dear. Well, look, listen, man, I love you, as you know. I'm so damn pleased to see you looking so well and laughing again, because this has not been a lot of fun. And I really, really, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're coronavirus free. I'm glad your daughters have got their big fat dad back. Not quite as fat. And send my love to them and to Rose as well. And we'll speak again soon. Okay, mate?
All right, Steve. Yeah, lovely chatting to you.
Take it easy, mate. Bye.
Cheers, bye.
I'll tell you what, I debated whether or not to get Pete to read his daughter's text. But I went with it because I wanted you to fully understand how impactful this has been for him and for all his many friends. I know there are several people still out there in the woods, and I know that staying home is driving many of you crazy. But this was a real thing that touched my life, however far away I am from the UK. Your mates are your mates, and I was devastated when I heard it. I know Pete, and I know him really well. In that conversation, I could still tell he wasn't back to his best. This has shredded him. And for those of you who may have doubted the importance of social distancing, this is working, and we're getting to grips with the virus. Yeah, as you just heard, it can smash the life out of you, so stay patient and stay safe. I'm still up in the air as to a middle section. I'm actually hoping that the trail opens up in a month or so and that our woman of a certain age, Kate Stillwell, can get a flip-flop of the trail underway. so I'm kind of filling in at the moment. I've had several emails agreeing that you'd like to hear past guests in a section called Because of My Hike, while I've also had a great suggestion for something like My Best Day on the Trail. I think I'm going to wing it for the next few weeks and hope that a favourite appears. As always, let me know if you have any ideas. Now, Grandma Gatewood makes her merry way north with a hurricane bearing down on her. Just what she needs. I'll see you next week. Chapter 10. Storm. August the 3rd to the 11th, 1955. On the morning of August the 3rd, sailors aboard the SS Mormacreed, travelling off the coast of French Guiana, noticed unusually strong winds blowing in from the west. They carried showery, squally weather. Around the same time and several hundred miles north, a freighter called the African Sun passed through a strong easterly wave that tossed the massive ship like a doll. At 10 a.m., another vessel, the SS Bonaire, radioed the National Weather Bureau in Miami, Florida, to report a falling barometric pressure and northeasterly winds blowing at more than 40 miles per hour. Waves were breaking at 20 feet, and it was becoming clear that a vortex had formed at the north end of the easterly wave. A hurricane was born. A reconnaissance plane spotted the eye of the storm, which was pushing winds at 55 knots and surging west-northwest over the warm North Atlantic waters at 16 miles per hour, slowly increasing in size and intensity, sucking up moist tropical air from the surface and discharging cooler air aloft, breathing in and out and growing as if it were a living thing. When the eye of the storm passed 50 miles north of the northern Leeward Islands and Puerto Rico, maximum winds were estimated at 125 miles per hour, and the storm had splayed heavy rain bands like fingers for miles in all directions. In the coming days, Hurricane Connie would change direction, stall, spin north then northwest, avoiding Florida and lining up to slam North Carolina and rake its way up the Atlantic seaboard towards southern New England, toward towns that would need new maps and people who would lose their lives and their loved ones and spend terrible hours clinging to treetops as floodgates crashed and rivers escaped their banks. In those slow days before the hurricane made landfall, though, before the obituaries had been written and before the nation's news magazines had questioned whether the weather of 1955 was the worst in recorded history, the people of New England set about their daily routines. The same was true for the stranger in the tiny town of Amesville, Connecticut, who woke at Eva Bates' house a little before 6 o'clock, slung her bag on her shoulder and rejoined the Appalachian Trail. Emma walked until she came to a low, swampy stretch in the woods, where the mosquitoes rose from the earth in thick clouds. She slapped at them a few times and then hurried to higher ground, where she stopped to thin them out. Sick of fighting the biting bugs, she walked into a town to pick up some repellent oil from a dime store. Salisbury, Connecticut wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road, but years before it was known as the Arsenal of the Revolution. For 200 years men pulled iron ore from the ground and shaped it into implements and guns and cannons. As Emma was leaving town, a woman recognised her as the hiking grandmother from the newspaper and called across the street. She invited Emma inside and served her milk and sweet cakes. A few minutes after she had started down the trail again, she saw a man standing in the road with a camera hanging round his neck. He asked her if he could take a photograph. She didn't mind. 10 minutes later, a reporter from the paper stopped her again and questioned her about the journey. This was becoming routine, and she wondered if she'd ever make it to Maine. She surged forward, up Lion's Head at the southern end of the Taconic Range, up Bear Mountain, the highest summit in Connecticut, across the Sages Ravine, its waterfalls dancing over moss-covered rock, where she saw her first porcupine, then into Massachusetts, leaving 9 states behind her now on day number 93. That afternoon she hiked away with a pack of Boy Scouts, but by nightfall they had not found shelter, and so the boys stopped to set up camp. Emma left them behind and climbed Mount Everett. There she found a fire tower but could not find a shelter. Everett's vistas were breathtaking, but it was too rocky to sleep on the precipice, so she went a bit farther and raked together a pile of leaves beside a boulder as darkness fell. Before she drifted off, Emma heard a voice. It belonged to one of the scout leaders. She got up and found them at the summit, flashlight beams shining through the trees, where they were searching for the shelter. Even with a trail map, the leaders could not find it. They left the scouts with Emma and went stomping around in the darkness. The boys looked thirsty, and Emma had a little water in a canteen. She offered it to them, but they refused to take it. When the leaders returned, she went back to her trailside bed of leaves. The rain started the next day, on August the 5th. What was already a slow slog grew slower. Emma made it just 2.5 miles in the morning. She met a man that afternoon, Joe Seifert of Newark, New Jersey, who was through hiking the trail in the opposite direction, from north to south. They talked an hour, but the downpour grew so heavy they could not continue their conversation. After sunset, Emma noticed a cluster of 3 houses, but no one would invite her in. She climbed over another mountain in the rain and finally found a kind soul, a woman named Mrs. Norris. The next evening, after another day of hiking through the rain, she tried to stay with a man named Moore, but he didn't have room. He offered his car. She reclined in the seat and caught a decent night's sleep. It was better than the picnic table by a mile. The rain clouds parted momentarily the next morning, and Emma hiked into Washington, Massachusetts, where Mrs. Fred Hutchinson started to fill a canteen, thinking she was a berry picker, until Emma spoke up and got herself invited to dinner, then to a nap on the couch, then to the obligatory newspaper interview, then to a night in a bed. The morning of Monday, August the 8th, Emma traversed Warner Hill and Tully Mountain near Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and was approaching Dalton when Hurricane Connie reached its maximum intensity 500 miles east of West Palm Beach, Florida, moving north-northwest at 15 miles per hour, drawing a bead on the east coast. Its winds were churning at 135 miles per hour near the eye, and gales extended 350 miles farther north. A Navy reconnaissance plane measured the eye. It was 40 miles wide. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander R.T. Pittman of Covington, Georgia, called Hurricane Connie the biggest storm I've ever seen. Another, Lieutenant Alfred M. Fowler of Waterloo, Iowa, gave this description. In the eye, you would think you were sitting in the middle of a big amphitheatre. All around you in a huge circle were bands of white clouds. Below was a deck of stratocumulus clouds, and above was the bright blue sky. We flew up to 10,000 feet, and the walls of the amphitheatre still rose above us. It was hot and wet in the centre as well, full of 86-degree tropical air. The National Weather Bureau issued small craft warnings for boats from Block Island, Rhode Island, to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, as people along the Atlantic coast brought lawn furniture inside and stocked up on non-perishables and hammered storm shutters over windows. The Bureau called it a severe hurricane, but no one yet knew the course the storm would choose. We're sweating it out, Walter Davis, a storm warning forecaster in Miami, told the Associated Press. Our best judgment is that Connie will be affected by the southern portion of the trough and will turn northward then northeastward. Time will tell. By that afternoon, as Emma popped into the post office at Dalton, where the clerk recognised her and introduced her to everyone in the room, the giant storm rushed northwest, swelling, gaining strength. Warning flags flapped from Cape Lookout, North Carolina, to Norfolk, Virginia, and the tides grew by 3 feet. 700 airmen from the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marines hustled to move planes and vehicles inland from the coast to Spartanburg, South Carolina. Giant waves lapped at coastal beaches, and gales of 75 miles per hour stretched 300 miles north of the eye. The North Carolina Highway Patrol, Red Cross disaster specialists, and Civil Air Patrol personnel organised for rescue missions. That evening, as Emma walked into Cheshire, Massachusetts, and checked in at Leroy's tourist home, something else had become evident in the Atlantic as well. Ships travelling 500 miles from the northernmost Leeward Islands, well behind the hurricane, were reporting new bands of heavy rain and east winds up to 45 miles per hour. While Hurricane Connie slogged toward the coast, another threatening storm was developing in its wake. The second storm had forecasters baffled. Would it peter out and disappear in the Atlantic? Would it weaken as another trough passed to the north? Or would it intensify and follow Connie toward the United States, setting up a nightmarish situation for the people along the coast? Before her, through the dark and low-slung clouds that raced north in the morning of August the 9th, stood the highest point in Massachusetts, Greylock Mountain. If the Berkshires behind her were light and inviting, Greylock at 3,491 feet served as a domineering challenge. The mountain inspired some of the greatest authors of American literature. Herman Melville drew inspiration from Greylock while working on Moby Dick, 105 years before Emma marched through. He thought the mountain looked like a whale, and he had a view of it from his writing room in Pittsfield. Henry David Thoreau wrote about his 1844 climb in A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, summiting the mountain a year before his experiment at Walden Pond. There was, no doubt, something special about the mountain, but the two men took distinctly different views. The themes in A Week and Melville's The Piazza, a story set on Greylock, both involve a man on a quest who meets a woman. To the narrator in The Piazza, the woman, a fairy queen sitting at her fairy window, represents a disappointment. He had climbed the mountain to investigate the magical source of light he had seen from the town below, and he finds an orphaned, isolated girl who had been wondering from afar about a similar curious light coming from his house down below. For Thoreau, the mountain woman had lively, sparkling eyes and was full of interest in the lower world from which I had come. And he thinks of returning to this house, which was well kept and so nobly paced, the next day, and perhaps remaining a week there if I could have entertainment. Scholars would wonder for decades to come about the opposing views of Greylock, of nature represented by a woman on a mountain. But rare would be the conversation about why both female characters were stagnant and isolated from the world below. Here came another sojourner, more than a century later, this time a woman with the wind at her back, summiting Greylock at noon and finding a mountain-top restaurant where she sat to enjoy a hamburger, a glass of milk and, for dessert, a bowl of ice cream, before making a descent toward North Adams and bedding down in the wild beside the trail, completely comfortable. She continued through the Berkshires the next day, and randomly 3 high school boys and 6 girls joined her as she ventured through a valley and into the forest. They were talking and laughing as Emma told them about her trip. "Wish my grandmother was like you," said one of the girls. Emma felt like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Around dusk, the girls headed back, but the boys continued walking with Emma. They led her to a freshwater spring and collected leaves to make her a bed nearby. Then they wished her well and headed back up the trail. She wrote about the boys and girls in her diary and how much fun she'd had, and she relaxed on the leaves and finally found sleep. That night, as she dreamed, 800 miles to the south, monstrous waves began licking the coast between Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina. The tide surged 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet higher than normal, and the ravishing winds began flicking shingles off beach cottages and lifting boards from fishing piers and ripping tree limbs from branches. As the eye of the storm neared land, it threw tornadoes across the low country, bouncing around South Carolina tobacco towns such as Conway, Latta, Dillon and Bucksport, where one cut a swathe 200 yards wide and a quarter-mile long, injuring a woman, her 2 daughters and a son. Another twister dropped near Goldsboro, North Carolina, 150 miles north, damaging a tobacco barn and exploding the dwelling occupied by a man, his wife and their 3 children, who were not injured. Along the coast, evacuees by the thousands packed into churches and schools and other structures made of concrete farther inland. Farmers sealed up tobacco barns. Hospitals turned to auxiliary power. The Navy secured its battleships. The National Guard evacuated 2,000 coastal residents of New Bern, North Carolina, to higher ground. 100 miles east of Boston, Massachusetts, construction workers were scurrying to sink and secure the massive legs of a radar island. The storm slowed for a spell off the coast, sucking up moisture, cooling a little, and by the time the eye reached land near Morehead City, North Carolina, it was bursting with 100-mile-per-hour winds and rainfall for the record books. It ripped off roofs and carried houses to sea. It chewed up fishing piers made of steel, and it slowly began to set a new course, turning toward the north, toward New England. About 1,200 miles behind the beast, closer to the equator, the winds of the second storm were quickly growing, and observers noticed a large cyclone circulating northeast of the Leeward Islands. They gave it a name, Tropical Storm Diane. A reconnaissance plane flying over the new storm measured steady gusts nearing 50 miles per hour and intensifying. Rain was falling when Emma woke, trailside, early on August the 11th. She hiked alone in the morning and was quickly soaked through, head to sneaker. She sloshed across the state line, leaving Massachusetts behind and entering Vermont on the long trail through the Green Mountains, toward the higher and more rugged section of the Appalachians, and the path was made horrible by the rain. Her shoes picked up mud and made walking hard and dangerous at times. In the afternoon she was joined by a pack of Boy Scouts. She didn't mind the company, so she kept pace with the teens. She noticed one of their leaders occasionally watching her walk, as if he was studying the old woman's gait for lessons. After a while he spoke up. He complimented Emma on her walking and said her energy and determination to finish what she had started were admirable. She liked to hear that. The Boy Scouts broke off and Emma hiked alone for a stretch, the clouds still soaking the earth, finally coming to a shelter near a mountain pond. 2 young men in their early 20s had already claimed the little cabin for the night. They started a fire and were cooking dinner when she walked in, sopping wet. They didn't seem too happy to see her come along, but it was obvious there was no way she was leaving. Harold Bell had just gotten out of the Navy, and Steve Sargent had left the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. They were hiking the long trail from Massachusetts to Killington, Vermont, doing some fishing and exploring along the way. They were surprised to see an elderly woman on this rugged, isolated section of trail, but they invited her in and made small talk. The young men were blown away that she had hiked all the way from Georgia, and even more surprised that she was carrying a shoulder sack that weighed less than 20 pounds. For 10 days of hiking, the Navy boys had each packed 55-pound backpacks, and they felt a little foolish. When it was time for bed, they hung blankets from the ceiling to divide the room. Like many of those Emma met along the trail, the young men would remember her for the rest of their lives, because of that chance meeting, and even more so because of what would happen a few days later when they saw her again.